I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. In my last video, I introduced my campaign world of Salanth and talked about how I'm focusing our D&D 2024 game in its Ironhold Orc Kingdoms. Today, I want to introduce to you the player characters and show you how they emerged from the setting. When I presented Salanth to my players, I showed them a map, this map, with named regions, but I didn't develop those regions beyond basic cultural touchstones. I don't believe in making anything concrete until we actually use it in play, at least as far as the overall world is concerned. After showing them the world, I said, we're playing in the Ironhold Orc Kingdoms, explained the Redmarch setup from my last video, and these are the characters that emerged. Lauren made Thirin Orsiniya, a war cleric of Tyrion from a noble family that was dispossessed by the orcs 25 to 30 years ago. Her father leads a resistance movement, and she's in Redmarch disrupting orc operations, believing that she is the rightful heir to the conquered lands. Dan made Nico, a wizard from the Chialin Empire with a scribe background. She's conducting a scholarly study of magic across the world as part of her master project. Andrew made Kieran, also from Chialin. He's a monk traveling as Nico's bodyguard and companion, and together they are trying to make sense of these strange lands that they find themselves in. Mike made Quirion, who has a bizarre backstory. She was a plain human commoner in Redmarch when she was struck by a chaos bolt of some sort and transformed into a high elf sorceress. Now she's hiding, trying to figure out what happened while avoiding suspicion. Adolfo made Roth, a half-orc rogue living in Redmarch's underworld. By the way, I'm very much aware that D&D 2024 doesn't have half-orcs or half-elves, but we've decided to go ahead and allow them. In the setting, half-orcs exist because the invading orcs established political marriages with local ruling families to legitimize their rule. Roth doesn't quite fit in anywhere and is always looking for a quick buck. Jason made Shali Tuin, a drow warlock who's made a pact with the equivalent of an old one. She's a sage by training, interested in magical lore, which is why she's in Redmarch. As an elf of any stripe, she's looked at with great suspicion, and even more so because she's drow, which means that she's not really accepted by anybody. Her motivation is basically finding magical stuff. Now, those are the characters that we had at the table for our first night of play. The first adventure went 3 sessions, if I remember correctly, and the second night we got 3 new characters. Mario made Roman, a half-orc fighter and son of Tharzug, the orc warlord ruling near Redmarch. Roman's mother, Lady Marion, married Tharzug in a political alliance. Roman disagrees with his father and goes to Redmarch to cause trouble. He's 18 or 19 years old, and he's with 2 companions when we meet him. The first of those companions was made by Jen, and that is the character Ingwin. He's a human fighter who was Roman's loyal guard and followed him on the road. Finally, we have Dano's character Vex, who is a rogue with a guard background. Now, Vex was a guard for Lord Orsiniya, Thirin's father, who's now leading a resistance movement, and although Vex is traveling with Roman, he has a secret agenda, something from the resistance that he's going to deliver to Thirin. And by the way, that was Dano's idea, not mine. There's a few key connections in this setup. Thirin and Roman knew each other as children. When Lord Orsiniya's family went into exile, they lived near Redmarch until Tharzug conquered those lands and held them as political prisoners while he married Lady Marion from the noble house that was allied to the Orsiniyas. Thirin and Roman grew up in the same household, therefore, before Lord Orsiniya eventually escaped with his daughter. So there's a shared history there, and Vex has something important to share with Thirin. Now, looking at these characters, I think there's an interesting takeaway here. I went out of my way to create a much more defined setting than what you'd get in the reimagined Greyhawk, or at least defined in ways that made more sense to me. Some players took advantage of that and grounded their characters in the setting. Thirin, Roman, and Vex are deeply rooted in the specific politics of Redmarch, and although Nico and Kieran are not, they are grounded in one of the touchstone cultures that I set up and brought that sense with them when they were interacting with the Ironhold Kingdoms. However, other players didn't really latch onto the setting in the same way. If you look at characters like Quirion or Shalith or Roth, they're either generic or gonzo in the style of most modern D&D games. They really could fit into any campaign. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I invited players to engage with the setting, and I'm happy that about half of them did, but I'm equally happy with the other players who said, that's not really striking me, so I'm just going to make a more generic D&D character. The exercise is still worth it to me, because if there's going to be gonzo crazy exceptional elements in the game, I'd rather they come from the players. In fact, I am okay with that coming from the players. What I want is for the setting where those characters are rooted to be more grounded. For example, I think it's cool for Jason to make a Drow Warlock who's going to be a singular type of person in the game. It may be a very long time before we run across other Drow and start figuring out how these hidden people work in this world. That's very different from the party walking into a bar where there are 3 Drow sitting in the corner and a beholder tending bar and a Goliath and a gnome over in another corner playing cards, and you get the point. Now look, everybody has their own lines for this kind of thing, and I'm not saying that my lines are any better than anybody else's. I'm sure that some people would look at what I've done and said, that's kind of silly and it doesn't really work, and they do it a completely different way. And that's totally cool. All I'm doing here is sharing how it works for our particular group, or at least in this particular game. Could be very different if we're doing something else. So those were the initial characters that played through our first adventure in the Redmarch campaign. Next time I make a video, I'll share what happened in that first adventure. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and as always, I wish you good health, I wish you good cheer, I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.